this episode, we will discuss the German-Polish relations in the light of the Katyn massacre and Poland's relations with the Soviet Union during the Second World War.
Later, these accusations of Polish-German cooperation would resurface from the side of the Soviet Union in connection with the Katyn massacre that was discovered and announced by the Germans in 1943. This was around 20,000 Polish military and police officers that had been taken POWs by the Soviets during the invasion, the joint German-Soviet invasion in 1939. They had been all executed in 1940 and buried in the Katyn forest. But the Germans, since they later attacked the Soviet Union and took control of that area, after a while they received information about these mass graves. They excavated the bodies, and they saw a great opportunity to sow discord in the Allied camp, as the Poles and the Soviets had become informal allies, you could say. Technically even real allies, as they had signed the Maisky-Sikorski agreement after Operation Barbarossa, under pressure from the Western allies that wanted to form a big united front against Nazi Germany. So they wanted to destroy Polish-Soviet relations and, through the extension, Western allied Soviet relations over this issue. The Western allies were not keen on drawing light to this massacre, as this was, of course, diplomatically a very sensitive topic. On the other hand, the Poles, they felt that so many victims, people of their own military, this was not something they could stay quiet about. So they asked the International Red Cross to investigate who was behind the massacre, whether it was the Soviets or the Germans. The Soviets feigned to be affronted by this fact. They, of course, knew that they had massacred these people. And they used this as an excuse to sever diplomatic relations with Poland. By 1943, the fortunes of war had already turned, and the Soviets, they were becoming increasingly confident, knowing that they would probably be the first to reach Berlin, and they would conquer a majority of Europe, at least the larger portion, and certainly Central and Eastern Europe. So they felt that they had no use of their previous alliance with Poland, since they would reach Poland first, and they wouldn't want to share power with the Polish government in exile in London. They would introduce their own marionettes. So in connection with this, they started spreading a lot of propaganda that the Poles and the Germans were cooperating, that the Poles had been friendly with the Germans before the war, and that this had continued during the war, that they were anti-Semites, that they had participated in the Holocaust. So a lot of the propaganda that was spread about Polish collaborations with the Germans was actually spread by the Soviets following the Katyn massacre. This was naturally all ludicrous if we look at what Poland as a state did, represented by the government in exile during the Second World War. They fought against the Germans on practically every front. They were there from the first fighting that took place by the side of the Allies in Norway during the campaign in the spring of 1940. They had a Polish army in France when the Germans invaded, also in the spring of 1940. Later on, they would fight on the seas during the battle for the Atlantic, with all these convoys and anti-submarine warfare that was taking place. During Operation Torch, the Allied landings in North Africa in 1942, the Poles were there during the battle for Tobruk. I could continue and continue. Naturally, also during the campaign for the Italian peninsula.
Indeed, famously at Monte Cassino.
At Monte Cassino, they had a big victory, that breaking through the infamous Gustav line that had been held for months and months and blocking the road to Rome for the Western Allies. Later on, the Poles also took the important cities of Bologna and Ancona. So their contribution during the Italian campaign was large. It was also continued following the landings at Normandy after D-Day. For example, General Matrek and his first Polish tank army that swept through large parts of northern France and then in through Belgium, and ended up in taking the German harbor of Wilhelmshaven, where the German Navy was stationed. These were all, we should remember that the Polish armed forces in the West constituted the fourth largest Allied army in the war. So of course we had the Americans, the British, we had the Canadians, but then we had the Poles, even though this was an army in exile, so to say. So it couldn't harness the entire will to fight of the Polish nation. But it was enough to create an army numbering over 200,000 Polish soldiers by the end of the war. Initially, the Poles felt that they wanted revenge against the Germans. They did get some of it in connection with the conference in Tehran. The Soviet Union presented their plan to the Western Allies that there needed to be border changes in Eastern Europe. They made it clear that they wanted to take parts of what had been Eastern Poland before the war and compensate Poland with territories that had been eastern parts of Germany before the war. So basically Poland lost cities such as Vilnius, or Vilna as the Poles know it, and Lvov, or Lviv as the Ukrainians know it. Those were territories that were annexed by the Soviet Union, while Poland in turn received, Germans knew it as Breslau. It became, or the Poles always knew it as Wrocław, but later internationally it became known as Wrocław as well. Also Gdańsk became a Polish city, which before the war had been a free city as determined by the League of Nations after the First World War. So you could say that the state of Poland shifted around 100 kilometers from the east to the west, and in those western parts of Poland that were known in Poland as the recovered territories, some of them were actually recovered as they had been part of Poland before the partitions in the 18th century, but there were certain other parts that either had never been part of the Polish state or only had some Slavic population around 1,000 years ago. So some of those areas were the people that had lived in eastern Poland, in Lvov or Lviv and Vilnius and Vilna. All of a sudden, they found themselves living in these recovered territories. The German population that was living there naturally had to be expelled. It was a part of these large population transfers that were taking place after wars.
If you join us next time on Poland Daily History, as I hope you will, we will pick up the story. Thank you for watching.